Hi, I'm Russ from 3Grow SharePoint Training, and in this video we're going to look at SharePoint Online's new list and library experience. So for those of you who are not familiar with 3Grow, just a little bit about who we are. So we're a SharePoint specialist training company running public and private SharePoint courses throughout Asia Pacific. We also run training in related tools as well, such as the Nintex suite of products and live tiles. A bit about me personally. So I'm Managing Director of 3Grow. I'm based in Melbourne, and I have been running training for well over 13 years. The last 9 of those years have been spent specialising in SharePoint. So throughout this video, we're going to be, first of all, having a quick chat about Office 365, just in case there's anybody out there who is not familiar with it, and also a quick intro to SharePoint Online, just to make sure that everyone's familiar with what that means as well. We're then going to talk about the evolution of the list and library experience, starting from SharePoint 2007 to the present day version of SharePoint Online. We're then going to dig into the new SharePoint Online interface in a little bit more detail. We're then going to just finish off by looking at the site contents page and the recycle bin, because they both have been impacted by the new interface as well. So Office 365 is a series of cloud-hosted apps and services from Microsoft, including SharePoint Online, OneDrive, which is like your online version of your My Documents, Exchange Online for email, web app versions of the Office applications such as Word and Excel and PowerPoint, Delve, which is your business-based social collaboration platform. Power Apps and Flow are both currently in preview. I will be doing some videos on those in the coming weeks, so keep your eye out for those. Flow is essentially a workflow product that integrates with a variety of platforms, not just SharePoint and the other Microsoft platforms, but things like Salesforce and MailChimp and things like that. Planner is a cloud-hosted equivalent of Microsoft Project. Sway is for producing stories, is the best way to describe that. And Yammer is for, again, another social collaboration platform. So SharePoint has been available since 2001, initially just as an on-premises server-based product. However, since 2013, it has also been made available as a cloud-hosted equivalent. It's essentially used for document and information management and information sharing. So it has some nice features in there, such as content approval and versioning and things like that. It's also a very nice collaboration platform, allowing people to work together to produce documents such as maybe policies and procedures and reports and things like that. Essentially, the document library side of things is designed to replace shared network drives, so allowing people to store information in a much more user-friendly way, making it much more easily accessible to the users. Aside from the collaboration and document management side of things, SharePoint also has pretty nice web content management functionality, so it allows you to create kind of richer content pages such as intranet or internet type pages as well. So let's now just have a quick chat about the evolution of lists. So as I said, we're going to start by looking at SharePoint from 2007 all the way through the on-premises versions to the current iteration of SharePoint Online. The main aspects of the lists and libraries that we're going to be focusing on are where we go to create new items, where we go to work with existing items, whether that's editing, deleting, checking in or out, that kind of thing. Where we find list actions, and also where we can create and manage and apply views. So what we found in SharePoint 2007 is everything was done either via the toolbar at the top or via the menu against each of the individual items. So dependent on your permissions would determine which of those menus you saw at the top of the library. If you had only read permissions, you would just see actions. If you had contribute permissions, you would also see new and upload, or in a list just new. And if you also had full control next to actions, there would also be a settings option to allow site owners to access the settings of the list or the library, and creating views and managing columns and content types and things like that. The views were accessible via a drop down towards the top right hand corner. In SharePoint 2010, the toolbar disappeared and was replaced by a ribbon. So generally there were two main ribbon tabs, maybe labelled differently dependent on the list or library that you were in. But in a library, for example, they'll be labelled as Documents and Library. Now, whatever the tabs happens to be labelled as, the general principle remains the same, in that the first of those ribbon tabs contains options and settings relating to individual items, whether that's creating items, editing items, deleting items. The second of those ribbon tabs, in this instance labelled Library, is where you would find options and settings relating to the list or the library on the whole. The main difference between SharePoint 2007 and SharePoint 2010 in the way that we worked is that because of the inclusion of the ribbon, as well as the checkboxes that we see down the left-hand side of our views, is the ability to perform actions on multiple items at once. So whether that's checking out multiple items, checking in multiple items, deleting multiple items, that's not something we were able to do in SharePoint 2007. Everything was done on an individual item basis in that version. So we still have the menu, so we can still perform actions on individual items, but with the inclusion of checkboxes, that does allow us to perform actions more quickly on bulk items. The views drop down was moved to the end of the breadcrumb trail. So you'll see in this screenshot, we are currently looking at the All Documents view within the Documents library within the Document Center site. So from that drop down where it currently says All Documents, there you would be able to switch views if you had permission to do so. You would be able to create views and edit views as well. You'll notice that SharePoint 2013 followed very much the same principle as 2010 as far as the list and library interface was concerned. However, there was the inclusion of the mini toolbar. You'll see that it is very simply just that option that states to add a new document. Now, what did confuse people a little bit in SharePoint 2013 is on the Files tab of the ribbon, the first two options allow you to create a new document and upload a document. Now, there is that mini toolbar that also states new document. However, what confused people was the fact that that's not actually going to allow you to create a document. That's actually a shortcut to upload a document. You'll also notice that the views moved from the breadcrumb trail down to that little set of ellipses is where we can access additional views or creating views. We still, of course, have the individual item menus as well, also available via these ellipses, which seem to replace drop-down menus in SharePoint 2013 in a few different areas. The ribbon stayed the same in the fact that they're labelled differently, Files and Library, rather than in 2010, Documents and Library. The main reason behind that is that users tend to refer to or it tends to get a bit confused because documents are normally the term we'd use to refer to Word documents. So files is a bit more generic to ensure that there was a bit less confusion in that sense. Now moving on to the classic experience in SharePoint Online, which is still available. Now the main thing you'll notice here is that the ribbon tabs remain the same, the ellipses, the views, they all remain the same. The main difference was the addition of a more comprehensive toolbar. Now what you'll notice is that with the addition of further options in that toolbar, where we've got now not just the ability to upload, but also to create new, sync your library locally, share, and also the more drop down, which is where we can perform actions on the individual items. Now, you'll notice that the addition of those options is moving back towards what people were more familiar with in 2007. So now we're using the toolbar more so than the ribbon. Now what I think happened here is that people tended to be a bit confused by the ribbon, or often they maybe didn't even see the ribbon at all, because by default, if we are looking at if we open a list or a library, what we would see is the Browse tab of the ribbon would be the one that's selected, meaning that the actual actions we use to create and edit the items within that list or library are hidden by default. So therefore users weren't necessarily able to find those without having been given a bit of guidance and training in the first place. So those core options were then made available via a more comprehensive toolbar, therefore gradually moving people away from the ribbon. So this is, in my opinion, an interim interface between the original SharePoint 2013 lists and libraries and which is essentially how the original SharePoint Online lists and libraries looked as well, between that and the new SharePoint Online interface, which, as we'll see in a moment, does away with the ribbon altogether and focuses just on a toolbar interface instead. So we will have a look at some examples of the list and library interface in just a moment, but just a few things that we're going to be looking out for within that new interface. We'll notice that there is no more ribbon, as I just mentioned. Instead, we have a reactive contextual toolbar. So you will notice on the classic interface toolbar in SharePoint Online, options are simply grayed out if they're not available, as we saw just a moment ago with that more drop down and share. Because nothing is selected, those options are simply grayed out. What we will find in the new interface, the new modern experience, is that very simply the options we see on the toolbar are only the ones that are relevant to what is selected, whether nothing is selected, a single item, or multiple items. We have the introduction of tiled views. So tiles became quite fashionable in the last couple of years with regard to presenting links on pages. So we do now have a tiled option within our list and library views. We have improved search, which shows suggestions as you type. We have the option to pin to top, which allows us to specify certain key documents within a library and ensure they are always at the top of the list or library view. Link to document is included as a content type by default to try and reduce the amount of duplication of documents. We can link to an existing document in another library rather than being tempted to upload it to two separate libraries. We also have the ability to group documents or list items by simply choosing from the drop downs. Previously we were able to apply filter and sorting options via the column headings of the view. We are now able to group by those as well. Once we have applied sorting, filtering and grouping, previously once we navigated away from that list or library, when we went back, the sorting, filtering, grouping options were then removed and we were back to that default view. Now what we have the option to do is once we've applied those settings on the fly, we can then save that as a view if necessary. Also, certain lists and libraries will have that the Flow and Power Apps integration as well. As I mentioned, there is going to be some other videos covering those topics and also some webinars that we're going to run. So again, keep your eyes out for those. We are also able to resize the columns within our lists and libraries as well. What we will find is that that is only just on the fly. Once we navigate away from that list or library, then return, the columns are back to their original widths. Hopefully that will change, because that is a bit of a frustration at the moment. We also have the ability to move and copy items or folders within that same library. We don't currently have the option to move or copy to another location, not from a team site library anyway. In your OneDrive libraries, you are now able to move or copy to a team site so that people can perform work within their own OneDrive out of sight of everybody else, and then move it to the team site once they are ready. My favorite of all of the new experience changes is the details pane. Now let's have a look at what we mean by that. So within this site, what you'll see is that I have got some a classic and new version of the standard documents library. Now, worth pointing out that in reality I would never keep the standard documents library because, well, the name doesn't really tell us what those documents are. So what I'd be tempted to do is create other libraries, delete the documents library, and create other libraries where the name and tells us exactly what those documents are. However, I have left it here just so we can compare the default setup of a library in the classic view versus the new experience. So in the classic view, we have our files and library tabs of the ribbon, as well as the new toolbar. Notice that because we don't have any specific content types added to this library, it is only therefore using the default document content type. What SharePoint will therefore do for you is offer you different document templates when creating a new document. I will compare this with the new interface, where we see exactly the same scenario with the addition, as I mentioned earlier, of the link to document content type. So the new item option on the toolbar is very much the same, as is upload. We also have the quick edit option, which initially in the classic view we would access via the library tab of the ribbon, but of course there is no longer a library tab of the ribbon, so the core options are either added to the responsive toolbar or are available via the list or library settings. So just like in the classic interface where we have the ability to sync, also via the ellipses we have the ability to set alerts. So most of these are focused at an end user rather than a site owner. When it comes to things like adding content types, managing columns, things like that, you'll notice that there is no longer, as we said, a ribbon. Therefore we access the settings up here via the cog towards the top right hand corner. Now what you may have already been familiar with in SharePoint is that generally what we find via that cog are site level options rather than list or library level options. List or library level options were available via the list or library tab of the ribbon. Now of course, because there is no longer a ribbon, the list and library settings are now made available via that settings cog up there in the top right hand corner. Whilst we are on the subject of the list or library settings, we'll talk in a few moments about which list or library templates currently have the new experience available. If you want to find out for yourselves, very simply by going to the list or library settings, then into the advanced settings. At the very bottom of those settings you will see if the new experience is available, we will have the option at the very bottom of the advanced settings which will allow us to switch to that. It may well be that your Office 365 administrator has already set the default to move to the new experience, they may have left the default to remain with the classic experience, allowing site owners to turn it to switch to the new experience as they see fit. So some list and library templates do have the new experience available already, some don't. You can of course find out, as we said, by simply going to the advanced settings of each list or library. Now these will be slightly different in different regions of the world as Microsoft roll this out gradually globally. I have done the hard work for you as far as certainly Australia and New Zealand is concerned, and I will take you through the list of the list and library templates that currently do and don't have the new interface available. So going back to the new interface, let's just flick through those main bullet points that we talked about on the previous slide. So as we said, no more ribbon. We have that reactive contextual toolbar. We have tiled views, improved search. Now, of course, none of this is particularly visible until we look at a list or library that contains some content. What you will notice is, as well as the original documents library, just to show you how that would look in the classic view versus the new interface, just as you would expect it to a document library to be out of the box. What I've also done is created another library, and here I've got some content, some views, and also I've added some content types to these as well. So both the classic and new versions of the meeting documents library are set up in exactly the same way as far as the views, the columns, the content types, and the content. So by making those identical as far as their setup is concerned, that allows us to see the exact differences between the classic and the new interface. So when it came to searching within SharePoint Online, we could of course perform a search in that search box at the top. You'll notice that it won't do part word searching, so therefore we do have to use the asterisk for part word searching. Whereas in the new interface, the search box is moved to the top left-hand corner, and as we start typing, it will come up with suggestions of items which meet the characters you've already typed. The tiled view and reactive contextual toolbar, let's have a quick look at those. What we mean by that is in the classic library interface, when we selected a document, or of course a list item, options that are not available will be grayed out. So as soon as I, for example, select a second item, we can no longer edit multiple items in one go. However, we can still check out, we can still delete. The rest of the options are still there, they're just grayed out. You'll notice that also the mini toolbar that was added in SharePoint Online in the classic interface did have a contextual element to it. What you'll notice is that when we go into the new experience, by default the only options that we see are for creating or uploading new items, or options that apply to the list or the library on the whole. As soon as I select an item, the options change completely. I can now open the item within the client or online version of the Office application. I can share it, get a link, download a copy of it, delete it, and here's that new option, Pin to Top. Pin to Top will ensure that within this view, that item will always remain at the top. Notice that when I switch views, for example, if I switch to a view which groups by chairperson, that document is no longer pinned to the top. So it is a per view option. Also, we'll see that as well as the standard list orientated view, we can switch to a tiled version of any view. So this is just our standard default all documents view, but now as a tiled version. If I switch to the view that is grouping by the chairperson property, you'll see that again in this instance it will apply a tiled view because that's what I had applied within the all documents view. However, I can then switch to a list version of that as well. What you will also notice is, as well as simply being able to expand and collapse any grouped views, just like I could within the classic view, the classic experience. Let's just apply that just to compare them. So of course I can expand and collapse each of those grouped views. However, what we will notice is within the new experience, not only can I expand and collapse those views, but if I were to select the group heading rather than the little arrow we use to expand or collapse, it'll actually open up that collection of documents as if it's a location, so as if it's, let's say, a folder, for example. And therefore, using the breadcrumb trail, we can then navigate back to essentially what it's essentially kind of acting as the root of the library, if you like. So that's the improved search, the tiled views, pinning to the top, link to document, as we mentioned, as well as the out-of-the-box document templates that we get with the classic view when we choose to create a new document. In the new experience, we do get the option to create a link to a document. Now what you'll notice in the meeting documents library is I've added a couple of content types. So we have the meeting agenda and meeting minutes content types. Therefore, from the new document option on the ribbon, we can choose the content type, just like on the new icon on the toolbar. If we go to the new version of that same library, of course there is no longer a ribbon, but on the new item drop-down, not only do we get the content types we've added ourselves, but we also get the option to link to an existing document. This will allow us to browse to a recent document, or we can have copied and pasted a URL from a document previously. We can, as we said before, we can also group by a particular column from that column menu, as well as being able to sort and filter like we always could. So in the classic view of a library, the classic experience, I can simply apply sorting and filtering via the column menu. What we'll also find in the new experience is I can, for example, not only sort and filter, I can also group by that column as well. Also, in the column settings drop down, we do have the option to rename the column, switch it, shuffle it left or right, hide it, or also insert columns. Now, as a general rule, I wouldn't recommend adding a column directly to a list or library. I much prefer to use content types to control the columns rather than adding directly to the list or library, but I suppose there are scenarios where that is appropriate. So once I have, for example, grouped by that particular column, maybe I've then applied some sorting and filtering as well. What I'm then able to do is save that current configuration as a view. So grouped by scribe, for example. So now, as well as the all documents default view by chairperson, by year, and my meeting documents, I also now have a view that groups by scribe. From that same view drop down, We are also able to set a current view as a default, or by choosing to manage views, this will take us to the list or library settings where we can manage those views as well. Now, there are a couple of frustrations with the new interface, which I will talk about in just a few moments. One of those is related to views, but we will come back to that in just a moment. Flow and Power Apps integration. You'll notice that we don't have any of those options currently showing within this document library. It is currently dependent on the list or the library with regard to whether we see that. What I have done is created lists and libraries based on pretty much every list or library template going, just so that we can see which lists or libraries do or don't have the new interface currently available. Custom list is one of the few list templates that does currently have the new interface available at the moment, and you will notice here we do have the option to create or manage your flows and also create an app using Power Apps. As we said, we don't get those in libraries at the moment, but we do have those within lists. The next bullet point was related to column sizing. Now, it is nice that we can resize. However, what's not so good in my opinion is that we have to resize quite so much. You will notice that at the moment I have quite a way to scroll over to the right to see the remaining columns. Whereas if I go back to the classic experience and look at the same view, SharePoint does condense it to the width of a page as much as possible. So you'll see that we have exactly the same columns being displayed in this view, and we have space to spare on the right hand side, while still keeping all of the columns perfectly readable. Whereas in the new experience, everything seems to be just spread out a little bit too much. Admittedly, we can resize those columns, like so we can condense that. However, what we'll notice is once I have condensed those columns, therefore allowing me to fit everything onto the width of the screen, and I have played around with saving this view as it is, having applied, having reduced the widths of those columns. If I then navigate away to a different list or library, then back to that same view of that same list or library, the columns are back to their original widths, and therefore we do have to scroll quite a bit to the right to see those additional columns. So a bit of a frustration there, but certainly nice that we can resize them, but a bit frustrating that we have to resize them quite so much in the first place. Move to and copy to are the last two options that we'll look at before we look at, as I said, my favorite new feature of the new interface, which is the details pane. So having selected a document, we have those two new options, move to and copy to. So you will notice that it only allows you to move to a new location or a folder, for example, within the same list or library. Same goes for copy to as well. So you're not able to, at the moment, from a team site, move or copy to another library. You can, however, move or copy from OneDrive to a team site, for example. Okay, so let's now have a look at that details pane. So with a document selected, up here we have the information icon, which will then open the details pane. What we'll then see within the details pane is a thumbnail preview of that document. Scrolling down, we'll then see the properties, so it states the content type, as well as therefore allowing us to populate any metadata associated with that content type. We then see recent activity, so if a document is modified, if a document is, has its properties edited or anything like that, all of that will then be tracked within the recent activity. You'll also see the version history will be detailed within that activity as well. Under sharing, we'll then see who has permissions. We'll also, of course, if we have permission to edit permissions, we'll also be able to apply those settings by stopping sharing a document, or by going to advanced. It will open up the permission settings of that document, just like we'd be able to in the original list and library experience. Under information, we'll see details such as the file type, when it was last modified, and also its path. Notice that if I select more than one document, notice what happens to the details pane. It cannot show details of more than one document at a time, so it simply tells us that 2 items are selected. Once I then select no items but still leave the details pane available, it will instead now show us the path and the activity for the library rather than for the individual items that are selected, but because of course there are no items selected at the moment. So whenever we bring up that details pane with nothing selected, it shows the settings or the recent activity of the library. As soon as we select an item, we see the details of that. As soon as we select a second item, just like we'll see that the contextual menu will amend accordingly, we'll then lose the functionality of the details pane with multiple items selected. So that's an overview of the new library experience. Hopefully you'll agree that there's some pretty nice new touches in there. As I mentioned, there are some frustrations with that. For example, a user who is not a site owner doesn't have the ability to create their own personal views. Also, as we mentioned with the column resizing, once you have resized those columns and returned to that library at a later date, the columns are back to their original sizing. So let's just talk about the personal views. Now, of course, in the classic experience, here I'm signed in as myself and I have full control. Therefore, not only am I able to, when I choose to create a view, not only am I able to create a personal or a public view, I can also, of course, manage any existing views. So I can choose to create a personal view or a public view. If I just switch over to my other browser where I'm currently signed in as just a training account, which only has contribute permissions within this library, or within this site, should I say, what we'll find is when I go to the classic view of the library, I do have the ability to create a new view. However, notice that we can only create a personal view. The option to create a public view is grayed out due to my permissions. However, when I go into the new library experience, on the view drop-down, I choose to manage views and will notice that I do not have permission to that page. So what that's doing is trying to take me to the lists or library settings page so that I can create views. But of course, unless I have full control or at least edit permissions, I'm not able to get to that page. Therefore, someone with contribute permissions is not able to create a personal view. However, they are able to in the classic experience. So a bit of a frustration in my opinion there. Even in the new interface, once we've applied sorting, filtering and grouping, again, there is no option to save those existing settings as a view for future use. Now, it is worth pointing out that by default, what SharePoint refers to as your members won't have contribute permissions, but by default will have edit permissions. If you do leave that default, that means that your main site users, your members, will be able to create personal or public views because they will be able to get to that list or library settings page. However, I strongly advise you not to grant edit permissions to your main set of users. The first thing I would normally do within a site is change the permissions of that members group to contribute rather than edit, because what edit allows users to do is not just use the lists and libraries, but also create lists and libraries and edit the settings of those lists and libraries. Now, in my opinion, lists and libraries are part of the structure, not the content. And contributors, your main users, should be responsible for managing content, not structure. So I don't think in most scenarios, I certainly don't think it's appropriate for your main set of users to have the ability to create and edit lists and libraries within your site. Okay, so that's just a couple of frustrations. As you'll notice, the frustrations, that's certainly a much shorter list than we saw with the new functionality that has been added. So there's certainly a lot of benefits to the new interface. So let's just have a quick chat now about which lists and libraries do have the new experience available and which ones don't. So your standard document libraries, such as any libraries created based on the document library template, things like site collection documents, the style library, and also your OneDrive do all have that new library experience available. In fact, you may have noticed that the OneDrive library experience has been based on the modern experience for quite some time now. So Microsoft did use that as a bit of a trial platform, so people could familiarize themselves with that new interface via their OneDrive before it became the standard interface within lists and libraries of their team sites. So your form templates library, also custom lists, also have the new experience. Now, as far as pre-created lists are concerned, there's only really reusable content and the content and structure reports lists that use the new interface. Any other standard kind of out-of-the-box lists and libraries, such as asset libraries, wiki page libraries, which includes your site pages library of a team site, and all other list templates, so tasks, contacts, announcements, links, calendar, discussions and surveys, etc. Certainly as far as Australia is concerned, at the point of creating this video, none of those list or library templates have that new interface available. For example, if I jump into this contacts list within my site, you'll notice this is of course using the classic interface. If I jump into the list settings and into the advanced settings, scroll to the very bottom, you'll notice that there is no option relating to the new interface. So it is worth keeping an eye on those. What you will notice is that if you are a tenant administrator within your Office 365 environment, then you may have noticed the settings that you're able to apply, which will automatically switch lists and libraries to the new experience once it becomes available. Now, I do know that in different regions, the new interface is also available in other lists and libraries, where it's currently not within Australia. So one of my customers whose Office 365 tenant is based in the UK, I have noticed within their environment that the tasks list for one is now using the new experience amongst other lists as well. So I'm sure we're not far off as far as Australia is concerned. That will start to happen in the coming months, no doubt. Okay, so the last couple of topics, because we have seen a big change in these two areas as well that are worth pointing out, is the site contents page and then the recycle bin. So here we'll see an example of the site contents page in the classic version of SharePoint Online. And what we'll see is that your lists and libraries are available via tiles in the top section of that page, but your subsites would all be available only by scrolling to the very bottom of that site contents page. So, of course, you may well have navigation links to get to those subsites as well, but to see simply a summary of those subsites or to create new subsites, we would have to scroll to the bottom of that site contents page. What we'll see within the new interface is that first of all, we do have some nice analytics that show at the top of the site contents page, such as number of views within the last 7 days, and also the popular documents, so the documents that have experienced a lot of activity in the last couple of weeks as well. But the other main difference is the fact that your site contents are now split over 2 separate tabs. So rather than having to scroll to the very bottom of the page to find your sites below your lists and libraries, we will now see those separated onto tabs. So let's just switch over to the demonstration site here. And on contents, we'll see the lists and libraries that exist within that site, and then on subsites, if you have any, you would see any of those there as well. You'll also notice that we can access the recycle bin from the site contents page, as well as a shortcut to site settings, and also any site level workflows. Also, from the drop down, we can create new lists or libraries, pages, we can add apps, and also create subsites. On the subject of the recycle bin, let's just talk about that next. So, in the classic experience of SharePoint Online, when we go to our recycle bin, initially what we will see are very simply the items that we've deleted from that list or library. Even as a site collection administrator, all we see is what we have deleted from that list, from the list and libraries in that existing site. Whereas if we want to see anything that was deleted by others, or anything that has been deleted from their end user recycle bin and is therefore sitting in the site collection recycle bin, we have to access that by going to the site settings. Then under the site collection admin options, we can then access the site collection recycle bin. So the site collection recycle bin shows us anything that is currently sitting in any of the end user recycle bins throughout that site collection, plus any items that have been deleted from their recycle bins and can therefore only be restored by a site collection administrator. In the new experience, when a site collection administrator opens the recycle bin, they will automatically see items not just deleted by themselves, but also anything that's currently sitting in the end user recycle bins. So for example, you will see an item there called docset homepage, which was actually deleted by the system account. So even though it wasn't deleted by myself, I will still see it within my recycle bin initially. Also, rather than having to then go to the site settings to then access the site collection recycle bin from there, I can simply access it using the second stage recycle bin link at the bottom of my end user recycle bin. So just to demonstrate that, when I go into the recycle bin within this site, I will see anything that has not only been deleted by myself, but has also potentially been deleted by somebody else. But that is currently sitting in their recycle bin. For example, as the student account, if I were to navigate to the document library containing the meeting documents, and if I then choose to delete this agenda, so just refresh the page to make sure that's definitely been deleted. It has. We're now down to 3 documents. Now, if I then refresh the recycle bin where I'm logged in as myself, I will now also see the document that has been deleted by student 1. In the classic version of SharePoint, what I would have to do is, in order to see anything that's currently sitting in the end user recycle bins, I would have to go to the site collection recycle bin via the site settings, where I would initially see those items, whereas now via site contents, when I go to the recycle bin as the site collection administrator, I don't only see what I've deleted as I did in the classic experience, but also what is currently sitting in the end user recycle bins. From here, I've got a shortcut to open the second stage recycle bin. Again, that would only be accessible via the site settings page under the site collection admin heading in the classic experience of SharePoint. From here, I could see anything that has been deleted from those end user recycle bins, as well as any sites that have been deleted from that site collection as well. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the demonstrations. So during this video, we've talked about a brief overview of Office 365 and an introduction to SharePoint Online. We've had a look at the evolution of the list and library experience from SharePoint 2007 all the way up to the present day SharePoint Online interface. We've then dug a little deeper into the SharePoint Online list and library experience just to make sure we cover all of the new aspects of that. And we just had a quick look at the site contents page and also the recycle bin, just because, as I said, they are impacted by the new experience as well, so worth just making sure that any differences there are covered as well. So thanks for watching. I hope you have found this useful. There are going to be many more videos to follow on the 3Grow YouTube channel as well, so keep your eyes peeled for those. If you'd like any more information on anything that this video covers, or of course if you'd like to find out anything more about our training offerings, please feel free to contact us on learn@3grow.net. You'll also see a link to the 3Grow website contact form in the YouTube description below. So thanks for watching.